Hello, and welcome to today's video on the Revit house we build during the Revit Architecture Intro class. I want to talk about the house as it was shown to me and some of the changes that I'm implementing into the house as I'll build it from now on forward. So first, we're going to start by going over the old house. I'll talk about some of the things I liked and disliked about that house design, and then I'll go over the new house that I'm starting to build these days. Okay. So here is the old house as shown from plan view. That means top view. We have these grid lines. Grid lines indicate where walls will go. And going from left to right, we have lines 1, 2, 3, and 4 separated 20, 10, and 20. And then from top to bottom, there's A, B, and C separated 20 and 30. So the idea there is that by having these grid lines, we can place our walls, and it gives us the ability to place these rooms and give them simple dimensions that we can work with. The second level is similar to the first. We just copied most of the internal walls up a level and then pushed one of the walls 5 feet back. That made space for a hallway and a balcony. So far, right off the bat, I can tell you one of the things I like about what we do during class is the simplicity of the design. All of the dimensions are simple, all of the walls are drawn simply. And in terms of one of the things I dislike about the design, that balcony on the second story is a really long hallway and it goes past the doors that it needs to reach and just goes out to the end, just sort of out of the sake of simplicity. So in terms of my thoughts so far, it's a nice clear way to introduce the idea of making these walls and grid lines, but that some of the design elements leave a little to be desired. Okay. I'm going to head over to the next slide here. And now we can see a section and a 3D view. So a section is looking for side view. And you'll notice that one of the things that's done is that we have level 1 at elevation 0, level 2 at elevation 10, and then made another level up at elevation 20 to be the roof. And that is one way that you can work towards making the roof. We did a roof by footprint in the original house, and it has the benefit of letting you define the slopes on the sides and making them all even. The problem, though, is that if you look at that from 3D view, we're looking off the balcony here, you can see that having the roof even throughout the house is a little odd because part of the house has a second level and part of the house is a balcony overlooking the first level. So when the balcony overlooks the first level, we don't really need the ceiling to stay that much higher than the elements. What we could do is have the roof slant down, and that makes more sense to me. Another thing that I see looking at this design is that it's the space. While it's nice to have spacious rooms, it's a little bit excessive. Like the kitchen goes on past where we have appliances or would need to make appliances, and that living room is quite large. So while spacious is appealing, it's a little bit excessive in that element. So I'll show you a little bit around the house in Revit proper. So if I open up Revit, here are the floor plans. And then I have elevations, and here's my section cut. Elevations are side views from outside the house, section cuts inside the house. And then if I wanted to go around one of my 3D views, I have this walkthrough here, which allows me to sort of browse what it looks like. So I'm going to walk around the old house and sort of the wheel here, then you can walk through a 3D view. So I'm clicking my walk icon and you can see I can kind of navigate my 3D view and see what it looks like. So I wanted to show you what the old house looks like. So down here you can see those rooms are a little bit excessively spacious. It's kind of nice, but also a little bit on the big side. Another thing of note is that edit in the wall there is a little unusual. Like there's that window-ish type thing we made and that archway. In the other house design, I often just use an opening object, which is a little less flexible. But we're going to show editing a wall to follow a stairwell in the next iteration of the house. So this gives us some ideas to work with. One other thing that kind of bothered me is that room right there is a bathroom, and I don't like having bathrooms in the middle of everything. Reminds me of this story my dad tells about his cousin's house and how the bathroom not only was in the middle of everything, but the noise would echo through the house and it just wasn't ideal. But I think people like their bathrooms tucked off to the side and the balcony just doesn't need to be so wide, and the ceiling doesn't need to be so tall. There's no garage in this design. So those were some of the things that stuck out to me. I collected them over here onto the slide, what I'm calling pluses and deltas. So pluses, things that I liked, deltas, things that I want to improve in my own version of the house. So the things that I like that it has most of the crucial rooms, like there's bedrooms, bathroom, kitchen, dining room, living room. I do like that it's spacious. I think it's a little excessive in that way, but I think that people tend to prefer a little extra space to it being too cramped. So that's something that I'll think about. I also like that it's not overflowing with hallway space. Even though sometimes you like to have a hallway to sort of tuck something around the corner, for the most part, hallway space is a little bit less necessary than your other space, than things that you actually use, kitchens and such. So it's while you can have hallways as sort of a way to connect spaces, it's not crucial to have a huge amount of square footage for hallways. So I do like that it's keeping them down. Another thing I like is the simple grid positioning for a class that we're going to show people. It's nice to have the grids separated by integers in feet and nice rounded values like tens and 20s. Another thing that's nice about the original design is it covered most of the key concepts we went over. We got a chance to do floors, ceilings, walls, what have you. We get to cover most of the spots we really want to touch on. And then in terms of things that I'm going to improve, one is we're going to reduce the size of some of the excessively large rooms, like that giant living room and kitchen, and then the balcony space could be a little more compact. I mentioned I want to tuck the bathroom off to the side. One of the issues in the original is there's no garage, laundry room, or closet, so I'm going to make sure I have space for those. Another thing was that the roof was overly tall, hanging over the kitchen and the living room. It seems like it should slant down on the side of the house where it has no business being that tall. I mentioned that odd wall edit with sort of this window between the rooms. I'm going to do the same method for editing the profile of the wall, but in a way that I think is more common, to follow the diagonal of the stairwell. Finally, one of the things in the original is there's something called a dormer, which is when you edit the roof to have a portion, it's kind of like a mini roof attached to the roof. And it can be good if you wanted an actual room where the attic could be. So if you had like an extra bedroom there. And in the original, the dormer is it's just there basically to look good. It can't get used. So I made sure in my design the dormer is an actual room that attaches to the rest of the house in a way you can utilize. Okay, so with that established, here is the plans for the new version of the house. I tried to keep those simple dimension intervals. So from line 1 to 6, each of those is 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, from 1 to 6. And then going down from top to bottom, there's also a pretty simple symmetry to it, 15, 5, 5, 15. So I'm trying to continue that spirit of having similar sort of rounded, easy to work with dimensions between the grid lines. But you can see here from the plan view that I've managed to address a few of the concerns. There's a garage instead of no garage. There's the bathrooms tucked off to the side here. I have a living room and a family room, which is common for a house this size. I have closet space, such as a pantry for the kitchen and a closet for the den. So we're addressing a lot of those concerns. And you can also see on the second level here that I didn't have the balcony extend all the way out to the east and west. There's no need for that. But the balcony does have space to connect to the rooms on the second story. So that should address most of the major concerns. Also of note is what it looks like from section and 3D. So in the section view, you can see I didn't need a level for the roof because the roof is drawn in a different way. It's drawn by extrusion, which means you just draw the shape in side view and then it pushes through the house. That allows me to, instead of having sort of a symmetrical roof, for it to slant down on the balcony. And so you can see that in the section in 3D here. And I'm still getting, instead of typical windows, we're using skylights. So you still get a lot of light in the living room and looking off the balcony, it just doesn't extend indefinitely into space that's not getting used well. I'm trying to make it use the space well. And while we don't get a chance to make a roof level, I do have a split level there at 3 feet. And one of the things that helps me do is split the stairwell in two. I make the little piece of the stairs going from elevation 0 to 3, and the rest of the stairs going from elevation 3 to 10. And that makes it so that the stairwell can slope up in a similar way to the way the roof slopes up, but also I don't have to make it so the living room is as long as the entire stairwell. So it sort of allows me to cheat and make the living room a little shorter. It just doesn't need to be as long as an entire stairwell, but also have the roof in a position where it's sloping up and following the stairs. So let's take a look at it in the point of view of the model, and I can talk about how it sort of addresses some of my thoughts. So I'm going to close most of my views. I use this close inactive views, which closed most of the views for my original design, and then I'm just going to close out of that entire project. Sure, I'll save the progress there. And now it'll take me to one of my views for the new version of the project. So since I closed out of the old project, it has no choice but to take me into one of the views to the project I still have open, which is the new one. So here I'm in the level 2 view. And if I go to this, I made an Explorer view where we can use the walkthrough tool again. So right now we're looking into the den, but if I use this walk tool, I can backtrack. And here you can see the living room. So the skylights above, which was able to cheat and get a little more light. There's a opening here to go from the living room to the eating area, and it connects to the kitchen. I can get to the kitchen through there or through the living room. So if you're in the living room here, then there's that diagonal entryway to the kitchen. And so there's still plenty of space for the kitchen. I still have those appliances. The overall layout is actually, in terms of the footprint, is 40 by 50 feet instead of 50 by 50 feet. So this one has a smaller footprint, but you might not notice it based on, in terms of the way the space gets used. This one feels like there's more room, even though it has a smaller footprint. So I think that's a good sign that I'm using my space well. And then if you go back here to the living room, I mentioned that there's part of the stairwell goes up to 3 feet, and then the rest of it, it's able to sort of shrink the size of this living room down to something reasonable, while still having the roof follow the stairs there, sloping up as needed until you get to the second story. Here I put a closet. So one of the problems with the original is there's virtually no closet. So this is one of the first closets. Under the stairs there, plenty of space to stash what you need to stash. This design has a garage. So if I go over here, there's my garage. And then if I backtrack, remember I wanted to tuck the bathroom off to the side, and that's where this is. So instead of being centered in the house, off to the side, here, space for a few elements. This design has a family room to go with a living room. So here with space for a few couches and a TV, and I placed the back door off to the side there. I thought that's where it's best. If we backtrack, and this is back to the den we were looking at initially. One thing that's kind of cool is there was space between the den and the kitchen for a couple of closets. So that means the den gets a closet. For bedrooms to count as bedrooms, they need closets. And then the kitchen gets this closet, which could be the pantry. I would put some cabinets on the walls, but that just gives me something to do a little later on. And this is one of my favorite spots. If you walk from the kitchen into the living room, you get to see above you those skylights. Okay. And then let's look at what this looks like from the second story. So if I go to the second story here, let's see. And there we are. So there's a view that's looking at the second story. I'm looking down off the balcony here. You can see there's a bit of space for decorations next to the stairwell. A little train set there. I have my skylights, let light in. And then next to the skylights, we have those dormer rooms. So remember I mentioned in the original design, they made a dormer, which is like a raised roof for a certain portion. But the dormer in the original design didn't really connect to the house. It was just sort of for show, here's a raised roof. But in this case, it really makes sense. If we go into these rooms here, The dormer is the difference between it sort of tapering down over there and having enough space for this to be a full room. So that's true on both sides. I have dormers on both sides. So that's true here and here. Okay. And then there's space between the rooms for some closets. Remember, that was one of my goals. And what that means here is that we have a little linen closet too. So just in terms of what that looks like from plan view, if I go back to the level 2 plan view, these rooms, they have closets between them and then the linen closet. So I was able to make space for that. These two rooms on the south end have the dormers. If you want to look at it from 3D, you can see what I mean by the dormers. So this is a version without the dormers. It just tapers down. But here's the version with the dormers, where you can see that it raises the roof on those sides so that they have enough ceiling space and the skylights. So one of the things I liked about this design is the symmetry of the second story, dormers on each side, skylights that are symmetrical. And if we go back to our 3D view too, we could go into the master room. Let's make sure I got my situator. So we're just looking at the linen closet. So there's a bedroom. Here, this isn't the master bedroom yet. This is space for the laundry room. I wanted to make sure to have one of those. An upstairs bathroom for all of these bedrooms. And then the master. So here's my master bedroom. This sink is optional. You could just make that more closet face, but some people like to have a sink both in and out of the bathroom so that if someone's using the bathroom, you can still prepare for the morning. And then here's the master bathroom. So you have sink, toilet tucked off to the side. You could have like another door in front of that if you wanted. The raised shower, whirlpool, spa. That space next to the shower is a little closet that connects to the other room. So I just wanted to make sure there was sufficient closet space. And that about does it for what I consider the fixed design for the house. I think it just does a better job of using space. The overall footprint of the house is smaller, but it feels bigger because it uses the space better. And I think that's sort of a good takeaway for thinking about architecture. You want to think about how you're going to use space, how people will use that space, and how you can have the elements people want while using the space in clever ways. So I think I'll leave it at that, and feel free to reach me at ross@cadmasters.com if you have any questions about how we've done the house and how I'm going to work through this house moving forward. Take care, everybody, and goodbye.